Hey there, guys. Welcome to the Robidoux Row live stream here today. Today we are talking about hotels, as you guys could kind of get from the hint last week on the post we made. We're going to talk a little bit about the etymology of the word hotel and where the concept of hotel comes from, and then a little bit about the eras of hotels here in St. Joe in that early 1840s to 1900 era. First, though, Brooke's going to tell us a little bit about the etymology of where the word hotel comes from, what a hotel was, how the evolution of hotels has happened, and then we'll dive right into a couple other things involving the St. Joe hotels.
The word hotel itself actually comes from Old French hostel. We use the word hostel today, but if you just take out the S, you get hotel. And so we've really Americanized the English version of hotel, and it's actually more of a modern word. Something that I've come to notice that when we've been doing research on hotels in the area, what were hotels? How did they get their start? You really saw in the beginning, the late 1700s, 1800s, they were called inns. They were called houses, right? And so these were more or less retrofits to just regular businesses. Even in the architecture, I don't want to get too far ahead, but some of the early houses, the hotels, were really just motels. So we'll talk about that. I know Daniel will talk about the more of the opulence in the seedier side of hotels in his section. I also wanted to note the rise of the hotel industry in America really hinged on a lot that was happening in expansion of industry and also the expansion of transportation. So I know through here, the steamboat, we had the railroad come through here. Also with the response from the gold rush, that was a big to-do. So I just wanted to kind of note there were trends, hotel trends, and accommodations based on what was happening politically, socially, and innovation-wise.
Definitely. And I know you were talking about earlier that, the idea of hotels has been around, or inns is better, for a long time. Just a little bit about where that started?
Back in, they call it biblical times, right? Okay, so everything can be traced back somewhat to the Greeks. They even developed, the Greeks, thermal bath houses, and also had the ability to accommodate travelers. It was mostly government dignitaries at the time that I was able to source this information from. So they really were opulent and ahead of their time. I know that bath houses, as far as being connected to hotels, during the 1800s in the Midwest, that really was kind of a few and far between. If you needed to wash your face, what you got mostly was a wash stand in your own individual room. Sometimes you weren't in a room by yourself at all. It kind of depend, and that's kind of where that hostel also comes from. Hostel itself, as we know today, is a room with many beds. So sometimes you would see that in America. But with the development of the roads, transportation system, the ability to move product farther distances from where you lived also meant that people could travel farther distances. So that was a contributing factor. So with indoor plumbing, that really changed a few things. So hotels were really motels during the time frame at the 1840s, 1850s, and then things really do change quite a bit when we have that influx of cash in the city.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, like we were talking about, we're going to talk a little bit about the different eras that there were of these hotel industries. There was really three major eras of hotels in the early pre-1920s era. Obviously, there's been more hotels since then. But when we're talking this era, you really saw that first era we were talking about, which was kind of the motel era.
Yeah.
Then you moved into the opulence era, or
the weed and seed.
Yeah, the weed and seed era. And then that third era, which we're not going to talk today, is really your more modern day hotel, your Hotel Robidoux, your Hotel Lees.
Yeah, the post 1900, you're really getting into, electricity, streetcars, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So first, we're going to show you guys another trailer for one of our great new exhibits here, and then we'll be right back with you guys to tell you a little bit about that first era, that second era, and then we'll be back to see you guys here in just a couple minutes.
Hello and welcome to my bedroom and kitchen. In this room, you will find items from my life and the lives of my children. Let me tell you about my life.
The first wave we're going to talk about starts in 1849. We have an explosion of hotels during this time period. As you can note, it's also the explosion of the gold rush. So we have mass amounts of people coming through the city. We also have industry development in banking. So that is also to note. There was an expansion of businesses and explosion of mass transit. So we really are seeing the railroad, the steamboats as being thoroughfares for people coming in and out of town in a much quicker basis. Also, the ability to move product on more of a national level and accommodate travelers is also during this time period. I wanted to mention the Occidental. It is an 1849 house, and during the early days, the word inn and house were used interchangeably to really denote a hotel. And in this time period, what we think of our modern day hotel, just think of this time period as more of a motel. What you would have was basically you were accommodated as a traveler. You had a bed, perhaps a small room, a washband, basin, and then the privy was outside. This was obviously before any sort of plumbing time frame. So it was pretty limited. You were basically in and out. You were sleeping, you had a meal, and then you were on your way. So with the explosion of the population, there really was an explosion of hotels. The Occidental is notably the first one, and that was on the northeast corner of Main and Jules Street. It was actually formalized style as the City Hotel, which we will talk about later. The building was made out of brick, and as you know, St. Joe is big on their bricks. Better than wood. I'd hate to have a city burn down to the ground like some we know. It was erected in 1846 by William Fowler, a pioneer of the circuit court and county clerk of Buchanan County. So during this time period, we have the founding of the town, and then we see a rise in governmental positions, right? We see roads and bridges that are developing. People are coming to town for occupations. There's a need for more of the schools and healthcare and civic duties. So you really see an explosion of people coming into town, people needing places to stay, and so forth. The next one, we do see the Edgar House. And this building is actually still standing today. You can drive by it now if you would like. That is located on the northeast corner of Main and Francis. And then Main Street is actually underwater. So that's kind of an interesting twist to the early part of St. Joe. The very first streets in St. Joe are actually underwater. However, this particular building still survives today, and you can drive by it. The actual architecture of it itself, it's very plain. What I would be reminiscent of in the European style housing, there really isn't any flares or frills or anything like that. It literally looks like a house. Perhaps some of these places are 2 or 3 or even 4 stories high at the max. Later, it would be known as the Planter House. However, the Edgar House was only in operation for 1 year. A guy named John Abel, who managed and owned the hotel within the structure, operated it. Then we see 1858, the Saunders House. 1858, the Patey House comes into play. We're not going to talk about Patey too much today. That's another discussion for another time. 1859, we see Allen's. 1859, we see the Pacific. And we actually have a few letters that are written from Isaac Curd, from the Pacific, and it's going to be up on your screen. You'll be able to kind of take a gander of that. They were pretty successful. The Atlantic comes in 1859 as well. So again, we're seeing just within those few short years, we're seeing at least 5 pop up downtown. The Pacific is kind of a fun hotel because we have direct archive pieces on the Pacific, which later becomes the Metropole in 1859. The St. Joe's population was about 1,500 people, just to kind of give you an overview. So in 1854-ish, John Abel actually started the Pacific Hotel, and it was originally a boarding house on Jewel Street, and afterwards it was bought and operated as the Planter's House on the corner of Main and Francis. After several years, he sold the Planter's House and then entered into a company called the Pacific Hotel, which we're talking about now. For 15 years, it was opened, and he was the sole hotel proprietor. During all of these years, it had remained in good reputation and was considered one of the best hotels of the West. He ended up selling the hotel, and it reopened. So basically, what we'll keep finding in history is that hotel names will pop up as new names, and it'll be the same location. We've kept finding that in our research. some of the names will be, this is a new hotel, and it'll be touted that, oh, this is a brand new hotel, but it's the hotel that used to be a different hotel. After that, we have the Atlantic, and then 1862, the Luxembourg, 1862, the Tremont. So what really happened during this time period, it was a place for you to rest your head. There was a variety of lodging in the second wave that would come to be that actually would surprise Daniel and I on the types of hotels. Many would be in extreme polar opposites of one another.
The second major wave of hotels in the St. Joseph area started in about 1878. This was the post-Civil War movement, when you saw a lot of the money coming in with newer industries that we'll talk about in the next couple weeks. But the next big group started with the First Ward House in 1878. The First Ward House was a fascinating hotel where the upstairs area was your traditional hotel and the downstairs was more of a saloon, like you would picture in your more Wild West era regions. A fun fact about the First Ward House, though, is it was actually one of the oldest bars opened west of Mississippi. And for many, many years, it was actually a local brothel as well. The building does still stand today, and you can actually still visit the bar today. They do have the history there. Another interesting fact, though, in the 1950s, part of the reason the modern First Ward House is one story is the top two stories were actually taken off and used to rebuild the Pony Express stables. So if you ever want to visit the top two stories of that, you need to go over to the Pony Express Museum. The next major museum or hotel that came through was the St. Charles. The St. Charles was the definition of opulence. This is one thing we found very interesting about this era was you had half of your hotels being more of the saloon, rundown, rough and tumble style hotel, and the other half were the rich, opulent, the Ritz Astoria, New York style hotels. The St. Charles was one of these places. It opened in 1880, which was the next really big influx era, was the 1880s, where you saw the St. Charles and the St. Francis, the Truckenmiller, which later became known as Hotel Lee, the St. James and the Hess, all opened in that era. And then, of course, ending up with the Metropole, which we talked about a minute ago, was the actual, the Pacific Hotel was turned into the Metropole. So the St. Charles was an absolutely beautiful building of 35 rooms. And its common size describes having potentially up to 45 rooms at times. As you'll see with some of the advertisements, some of the things that the St. Charles did and showed the opulence of some of these hotels was they were advertising more of what was being done in St. Joe with the theaters and different things that you could access and advantages you could take of by staying at the hotel over just a movement through period like we saw with the first large wave. The hotel did stay there all the way up until 1937, where it was renamed for only 5 years as the Hotel Milner, and then later it was renamed again back to the St. Charles. An interesting fact about the St. Charles Hotel was that Paper Moon, the film that was famously taped here in St. Joseph, taped a number of their scenes in that building. Unfortunately, it did later get torn down, so you can't visit this beautiful motel, but it was a beautiful place in the 1880s. The next major hotel we want to talk about is the St. Francis Hotel. This was an interesting one because it was originally known as the Heaton House, but there's no history that we can find where it was a hotel. It was just viewed as kind of a dormitory or boarding house style. It was originally opened in 1880, and it was located at the corner of 6th and Francis Street. The building itself was rather large for the era, being measured off as 45 by 52 feet and 3.5 stories tall. One of the big advertising for it was that the streetcars would drive right past it. So if you were coming to town to be able to shop at Townsend and Wyatt or to go to the theater, you would be right in the hubbub and the heart of St. Joseph and be able to visit. The other major hotels, like I talked about, the St. James and Metropole, all had amazing stories, and many of the advertisements we find from those as well were about the theater, about the opulence of money that was available from these really nice theater stuff that we talked about last week. There was, again, of course, a third era, which was much later in history, a lot more of the ones we know about, like the Hotel Robidoux and the Hotel Woodlawn in Ryan. But those are something we may cover in a future episode. Hey there, and welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that presentation about those two eras of hotels. It's such a fascinating concept here of people traveling. We definitely do want to say a special thank you to our friends at St. Joseph Memory Lane.
Yeah.
They really helped us out with getting some of the dates and some of the more intricate details that are a little bit harder to get a hold of, especially when you're working off business directories where they don't have opened in 1859 just labeled on an 1860s.
YouAreTheBomb.com. Thank you.
Definitely thanks so much to them. Go check out their website. They've got some really cool images of St. Joseph and some history that just is a little harder to get a hold of. It's a lot more personal anecdotes. We did want to tell you a little bit about some of the things going on here, some of our new exhibits, some actual activities we're doing here, and a little bit about our hours. So, Brooke, if you'd like to take it over.
Sure, yeah. We are having a community garage sale. We do invite you to come down, take a look, take your own piece of history home with you. And also, if you would like to be involved, perhaps you have something that you would like to sell, maybe downsize a little bit. We are selling indoor spaces, outdoor spaces, as well as tables. So just bear that in mind. Give us a call, email us, and we'd be happy to get you set up with a space. Now, this is on July the 9th. That is a Saturday from 9 to 3 that day. So that's a month away. Put it in your calendars.
Definitely.
Yeah. Also, I did want to mention we have a new exhibit. It is our theaters exhibit. It highlights the opulence and the grandeur of the theaters in St. Joe, and it's been such a fun and delight to research for this, and we have some amazing archive pieces as well. So that's opening up pretty soon, and come down and check it out.
Definitely. And as we said, we've talked about before, we are in our summer hours. So we are 10 to 4 every day.
Good, yeah.
So definitely come see us Wednesday through Saturday. Come check out the theater exhibit and all the other great exhibits that we do have here that we've been opening up this year.
Yeah.
We do hope you join us again here next week. We're going to move into a new era of St. Joseph history. One that's a little more of a combative era, if that gives you guys any hints. And if you guys do have any information that you guys want to share about some of the hotels, maybe you know some more about some of the hotels we talked about, or some of the ones we didn't talk about from that same era, we'd love for you to share them with us.
Well, one thing that we weren't able to get it's so hard to, get all the little fun tidbits, everything in. We try to get a more of a holistic view, but if you have any more of those really fun, nuanced stories that you would like to share about the hotel industry, I know one of them that wasn't able to make this segment, that was in the newspaper from back in the day. This guy was complaining, one of the proprietors, business owners of the hotel, they had a credit line. And so he was talking about how he would give credit to people based on how they presented themselves when they first walked through the door. So they didn't have to show ID. They literally just gave a name. And the guy was basing who he could give credit to based on literally what they looked like right at that moment when they walked through the door. There was no contingency. There was nothing.
Yeah, so those kind of stories we'd love to hear. And like I said, next week we'll be talking about some more new stuff. So we hope you join us here, and we hope you had a good time today. You guys have a great night. Bye.